of self-determination. It makes a mockery of them. So let me just finish by mentioning what I think the President can do about this. First, he needs to have the courage to say that Puerto Ricans have to be offered constitutionally viable options. That would make a big difference to say that clearly. And even more importantly, secondly, he needs to state clearly what those options are. They are statehood, independence, and a treaty of free association with an independent Puerto Rico, under which, by the way, Puerto Rico could get a lot of what the compact promises. Congress can also allow Puerto Ricans to stay in their current status, but if it does, then we need to keep having regular plebiscites, because the current status is territorial, it's untenable, it denies voting rights, and it won't solve the self-determination problem. What Congress can't do is offer this promise to bind a non-state, pseudo-national territory of Puerto Rico to the United States. Finally, the President needs to put the full weight of his influence behind the proposition that the time to choose among these options is right now. That is the only way to resolve this issue. Anything less than that is simply not enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Tom's going to facilitate this session, but I didn't want to miss an opportunity to thank both of you. I have to say I would just enjoy watching the two of you debate and to sort of work this out. It's really both really fascinating and enlightening, and we really appreciate your presentations. I neglected to say when we started this session that since we began this conversation, since the task force convened, since we held our hearing in San Juan, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the House of Representatives at least has acted in passing H.R. 2499, and that I think at some level after the presentations that we heard in Puerto Rico, and this is in fact what we said when the bill passed, that in some ways any time Congress acts on the question of providing the people of Puerto Rico the ability to make their own judgments on this and to determine their own future is a good thing. Having said that, we also came back from our hearing in San Juan deeply aware of the divisions on this question, and you've really in your presentations outlined really quite clearly exactly why that is and where that comes from. So we appreciate that very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Well, I'd like to thank you again. I don't think we could have asked for better presentations on that core issue. I guess I'd like to hear from you and also hear from the audience more, because I think whatever the definition of options, there is the question of whether H.R. 2499 or another means of going forward is the right way to ultimately determine the will of the Puerto Rican people. And so I'd be interested in thoughts and comments both from the panel and from the audience on that question, because certainly when in our experience in our sessions in Puerto Rico, we heard the deep divisions, and whatever happens at the end of this process, one certainly wants to make certain that people believe that the outcome was at least valid, and that the process was fair. So I'm interested in whether folks have views. I'll start with the panel, and then I would love to hear more from the audience.
Well, the critical thing from my perspective, as you gathered from my presentation, is that whatever the process is, it's got to define the options clearly. So one message I would want to convey is that the idea that somehow Puerto Ricans should sort this out among themselves, figure out what you people want, then come up and let us know, any version of that is an abdication of responsibility. The options are contested, as you can see, and so what we critically need is a formal position from Congress about what Congress would be willing and able to implement. And that would require a spelling out of what the options are that are constitutionally viable and that Congress is willing to implement. As far as 2499 specifically, I am, of course, well aware that there's been a lot of controversy around that bill. I don't think there's ever been a bill that there wasn't a lot of controversy around. I considered that, I'm not an expert on voting processes, and I'm not a game theorist. The two-step process struck me as perfectly fair because there is consensus that the current status is not good enough even among the defenders of Commonwealth, right? There are these proposals to improve it or enhance it or a new Commonwealth, Commonwealth of the future. You know, right now we don't have a status that fulfills the goals of self-determination. So in my view, confirming that by letting the electorate make clear, yes, we want to move forward, seemed like a perfectly fair way to move forward. And then the definitions of the options, being as contentious as they are, these were pretty spare, and that struck me as, you know, yet another good way to move forward. Let's at least have an outline, and then the parties will have to battle it out in the campaign, and there are always risks to that. But this was a way of overcoming objections to certain versions of the definitions that had come before. I had been on record as saying that I feel like Congress needs to spell out the definitions clearly, but I can see why a spare definition would be a way to move. This to me was a sort of, you know, a compromise in the bill that I feel like I could live with. The amendment to the bill that you're all aware of that added the present status to step 2 after you could vote yes or no to the present status on step 1 obviously was designed to kill the bill. It's the height of cynicism. I'm appalled that it happened, and with that in it, you know, I think I'm just going to, what can I say? I mean, I'm not going to go out into the streets and fight for the bill now. I think there are other ways to proceed, but I do think that what's critical is that people need to have the options spelled out for them.
What I would say is that it's particularly important that there be as much clarity about the legal issues and what these options mean as possible for people in Puerto Rico if this is put to the people of Puerto Rico in the first instance, you know, in a plebiscitary kind of process. I personally, by the way, do not have a view. I think it would be inappropriate for me to have a view about which of the various status options is the best option. I mean, I think this is a question of self-determination for the people of Puerto Rico in the first instance. But what I've been very, very concerned about is that there's tremendous exploitation for partisan political interests about these various options and what they do or do not mean. And I think that one of the things the task force can do in conjunction with whether it's a convention in Puerto Rico or a voting process in Puerto Rico, to try to generate some consensus in Puerto Rico about ultimately what people there desire, or other people who participate in the vote, Puerto Ricans in the diaspora in the United States, that we have to clarify what the choices do and do not mean. So for example, with respect to the option of statehood, there is tremendous anxiety in Puerto Rico that statehood would only come with a requirement that Puerto Rico make English the official language. Now, whether or not Congress would do that, I think it's important to clarify that in constitutional doctrine, even if Congress imposed such a condition, it would not be binding.
Really focusing on looking towards the future and what kind of training we can
because
provide that will
doctrine,
match what these other departments are doing in terms of the ability to attract investment, so that we're training the workforce for the future in areas like green jobs, possibility for health care, allied health, etc. We toured along with everyone and received a lot of really interesting information from regional municipalities and and municipalities, specifically around their interests, because we need to hear from you what you think, where the island can go, and what kind of investments can be made, and how we can also better leverage our resources as we move forward. So everything from infrastructure we heard, and as well as issues like tourism and ecotourism. So it's all looking forward.
Statehood and has been for a long time. And I actually don't believe her views on that would change, even if she came to the view that the United States does have the power to bind itself to Commonwealth status. But I think it's very important to clarify and to clarify the confusion created by the President Bush's task force on this issue. Because the task force in 2005 and then again in 2007 produced a very, in my view, very, very shallow analysis of the legal issues and essentially took the position that there was no meaningful intermediate status option, that the United States could not enter into such an arrangement, despite the fact that for 50 years the United States pledged to the United Nations that that's what it had done. That's why Puerto Rico, that was the process of decolonization that the United States represented that it had made a binding commitment to respecting Puerto Rico's autonomy and self-governance. The United States said many, many times over that period of time that it had the power to do so. But the uncertainty about that question continues to be debated genuinely and exploited cynically, in my view. And you have prior task force which have actually taken a position on that question. And I think that position is wrong, and I think it's extremely important to clarify the meaning of these options for many of the same reasons Professor Burnett suggested, in conjunction with whatever legislation there might be to authorize a process going forward to gauge the